Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to the Blue Room. This afternoon, we'll be discussing global mobility and cultural preparation. Something that I'm not too knowledgeable about, so I'm really looking forward to listening to the experts. Such an important conversation, though, because it's so important to both to families' personal lives and also to companies. But without further ado, I'm going to be bringing onto stage Robert Masel, Elena Anderson, and Frigina Hodson, and I'll let them do the full introductions. Now then, bear with me, everybody. There we go. I've got a bit of a technical issue here, I'm afraid, actually. So Frigina, Elena, Robert, welcome to the Blue Room, and thank you for your very valuable time. If I could turn over to yourselves, please, for introductions. If we run through it, Elena, Frigina, and Robert in that order, that would be fantastic. So over to you, Elena, to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us live, and for those who watch us recorded. I am Elena, and I'm based in the Maryland, D.C. area. I am a consultant in the global mobility space, and I work with organizations of all sizes and supporting their cross-border needs, from immigration to just their general global mobility needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. And over to you, Frigina. I'll just unmute you. I've muted everyone. There you go. Oops.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm through. That's short for Frigina. So I work for Sterling Lexicon, and I've been in the relocation industry for about a decade now. So typically, I have worked in the destination services side. So I am based in the UK, in London, so I work a lot on the UK side. I work with a lot of organisations, quite similar to Elena, all sorts of shapes and sizes and all kinds of industries as well, supporting all of their needs, end-to-end relocation processes. So nice to meet you all today. You're on mute, Richard. The anthem of 2021.
Thank you. And last but not least, Robert, over to you.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks to second what Frigina and Elena and Richard have said. Thank you for joining us live, or thank you for watching the follow-up if you can't join us live. I'm Rob Masel. I work with organizations to fulfill their cross-cultural needs, working with specific cultures or cultural adaptation, both on the employer and the employee side. And I also work with individuals and organizations on meaningful travel experiences. So looking into the intention behind travel and what people can gain out of it. I am based in, you guessed it, New York City, as the map. I'm trying to do the finger thing. There we go. And have a map of it right behind me. And that's it for now for me. And you'll hear more from me and these lovely folks in just a bit.
Fabulous. Thanks, Robert. It looks like I'm having a bit of an issue streaming to LinkedIn, actually. So I'll need to be looking into that whilst you're speaking. And in fact, that works really well because Robert has very kindly agreed to guide us through this discussion as a much more knowledgeable person than I am on this topic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move Robert over to the top left. There you go, Robert. And yeah, so I mean, we're looking at the topic from both the employee and the employer perspectives, of course. But if I may, simply hand over to you, Robert, to start wherever you feel that it's a good place to start. I'm trying to. I'm just can't unmute it. Just a moment. You need to. Right, sorry. I think we were like. going back. My fault. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was talking into my own world and nobody was hearing it, and that's okay because that happens sometimes. But now I'm talking to the world and people can hear it, and that's cool too. So I think a good place to start the conversation is just from a general perspective, thinking about the importance of culture, cultural differences, and cross-cultural training. Well, I'd like to start off with a little bit of my own personal story, just a tidbit. When I kind of got into this world, Elena, Richard, Frigina, our audience, I was really, I had come back from a lot of different cultural experiences in travel, and I was just shocked at like how many companies were not investing in it. And I was just thinking to myself, that's crazy because it's such an important thing to understand. Based on my experiences, I went to places and I just didn't understand, and I screwed up a lot of stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, this is important stuff for people to know, right? Um, but what I felt, and I feel really good because as we've moved through these challenging times and people have been more connected than ever, I think the need for better understanding people and cultures is really coming to light. And more organizations are starting to realize this need. More organizations are being proactive um, and investing in these trainings. Um, so when we think about that, um, when we think about cultural training, it can really be from the employer side and from the employee side because there's benefits to both, right? And I think today's discussion we want it to be kind of free flow and go along with the audience, but we want to kind of tailor it to better so that the audience can better understand why is cross cultural training so important and why is it important from the employer's perspective and why is it important from the employee's perspective. And I'd like to shoot it over to Elena to talk a little bit about, from the employer's perspective, you know what do you think, why do you think cross cultural training is so important for the employer, Elena? I'm gonna work with that mute. There we go.
Yeah, I'm a little slow with a muting function there. With the employers have come a long way. I remember about 10 years ago where employers used to just think it as an optional service for the transferee. And there was a lot of debate from global mobility professionals with how to make it a priority or a cost benefit for the assignee. Now, it tends to be, especially with various core flex policies, it's one of the required services that is invested into the employee. But there's so many different options, the in-person versus the virtual version or the really quick cultural training. And we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And so there are a lot of assumptions made based on the host country or the destination. That means that, well, we can kind of cut this cost in order to accommodate other areas, or we really don't see the return on investment for that. And honestly, you don't really see the impact until it's too late. So it's a lot of the impact is very invisible in that cross-cultural training impacts the productivity, it impacts collaboration and communication. And as someone like yourself, I've made a lot of faux pas and missteps in my interactions. I can't imagine being on assignment and doing the same thing and having to rebuild trust and reestablish relationships based on a mistake. And some things you cannot learn in a workshop or a few sessions. You just have to live and experience it, and being able to circle back and check in to someone or a group that's safe to ask questions about why or what are some of your lessons learned that I could do that. But employers really have a duty of care or obligation to make sure that their transferee as well as family members are able to really not just survive, but thrive and represent themselves in the best light. when they are reaching their destination. And with that, everyone wins. The individual wins as well as the organization, as you won't have any minor or major errors made that would disrupt relationships in the host country.
Thank you, Elena. I think that you made a bunch of really valuable points. I want to touch upon a couple of them. One of which you're talking about sort of being proactive, right? And understanding that this cultural training is super important and it's a way for you to avoid these cultural faux pas. Now, are people perfect? No. Are people going to make mistakes even maybe after they've had a cross-cultural training? Sure, because nobody's perfect, right? But is there value to having a baseline understanding of how to operate in a new place? Absolutely, right? And something else that you touched on earlier in the response, I want to bring to light. You said, sometimes the cross, and I've experienced this too. The cross-cultural training benefit might be one of the first ones to be cut in traditional times, perhaps because, employers have had a rough time justifying the ROI or seeing the hard numbers. Now, this is a challenge, I think, for any kind of training, but important to understand, specifically in cross-cultural training, that being proactive and providing this training will bring people to the next level for their relationships and able to, spur great progress in an organization and profits. And I want to bring it to Frigina and ask, have you seen this with some of the work that you do with employers maybe being hesitant to provide cross-cultural training for reasons, or employees being hesitant to accept cross-cultural training for any reason? Curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, most certainly. So I feel like back in the day, about I don't know, 5 to 10 years ago, relocation tended to be for people who were really senior, and those people got the package where everything was included, including cultural training. Nowadays, with the cost cutting and moving non-senior employees, I think a lot of companies look at cultural training as more of an added benefit rather than something that is necessary. So from a company's perspective, I would say the less senior the employee is, in my experience, the less need they see sometimes for a cultural training. And from an employee's perspective, sometimes if they come from a similar culture, so for example, if an American moves to the UK, they would sometimes suspect that they would be familiar with the culture, and it only hits a little bit later on that it's not quite the same, and it's not about the queuing system, it's not about the politeness that they would have expected, it's not about that how we drink our tea. It's a lot more than that, how we engage with each other here in the UK. So a lot of times people have their set assumptions when they move to a certain country, and those people that I have seen not that keen taking up cultural trainings were because they were just not interested because of their own set of beliefs that they have brought with them, being quite comfortable with what they have thought they knew.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And it's such an important point right there, Frigina, is the fact that cross-cultural training can be overlooked sometimes, especially in situations where people feel they already know the culture, or it's not that different. Let me give you a personal example. So here I am in the US and I've visited the UK. I even thought to myself, it's going to be pretty similar. I found myself in a sort of an awe of certain words being used, caught me off guard actually, and I misunderstood people because certain words in the US versus UK were different. I also experienced one of the major things that I want to share with this was through my time in the UK, I came to understand that seemed to me that it was sort of, let's say in the US, you are you have sort of free reign, do what you want. And let's say you go into a bar, you're getting rowdy, you're getting kicked out. Okay. But my experience in the UK, so I was solo, and a couple nights that I went out, I wasn't let into the bar. And I was thinking to myself, what is this all about? And the gentleman said, well, we don't really know if you're going to be a problem. You don't have any friends to support you here. What if you get what if you get really crazy? What if you get, so it seemed to me that, and this along with other incidents that I experienced, it seemed to me that there was more of a preventative mindset in place, that because there could be an issue, we're just going to look to prevent it beforehand. So it sort of caused me to think, you know what, that's interesting. And as I continued conversations personally with other folks that I met on this trip, and they said, you know what, yeah, that actually seems to be the case. And when I also look at just the way different countries handle the whole pandemic and things like that, um, it's been very interesting. And I think the UK has taken a very preventative approach to it. So, little things like that people can experience that they might not expect. And this kind of comes with, like, the training can give you that baseline understanding, whereas then people's own experiences solidify what they've learned and give them context. So, and I also want to go back, Virginia, to your point about, because I thought this was really interesting, the idea that cross-cultural training was traditionally focused more on senior level executives, right? And just sort of more recently, as a lot of people are moving around, it's getting sort of pulled into employees of all different parts of the organization. Um, Now, when we're talking about the senior executives receiving, the whole package and all this, do you think nowadays it's important for all employees to get the same sort of set of benefits, or do you think that that traditional model stands?
That's a very interesting question, because what I have seen is people talk to each other. So, especially people who come from a similar country, a similar location, or go to the similar location, they will know each other most likely, and they will talk to each other. So they will know what each other get. So I think from that perspective, either they will have to get something similar, or the company needs to be super transparent on what they get, and then why they get certain benefits. I think it's kind of impossible to get exactly the same package because everybody is coming from a different background. So some people come with kids, they will get education support. Some people need a visa, some people will not need a visa, and those people need different kind of support. Some people will need a cultural training and some people won't need a cultural training because some people may have been living in the host country already for 10 years before. So I wouldn't say everybody needs the same sort of level of support, but it needs to be communicated openly as to who's getting what and all of that, because some people tend to be a bit disgruntled as to what support they get or don't get.
Exactly. And the last thing that anybody wants to deal with is a disgruntled employee, right? And I can attest to that, Regina. My work with Bloomberg revealed the same, that it was really important to make sure to communicate to folks, sort of the core policies and why people were getting what they were getting, and making sure that there weren't any questions that were unable to be answered, like why did this person get this benefit but I didn't, right? Whereas they're in the same boat kind of deal. Elena, I'm curious to hear,
Mhm.
I would like to know about your experiences with this, sort of the provision of cultural training on different levels, and if you have seen with your work, just, people, is it important to give all relocating employees the same benefits? Does it vary depending on someone's seniority? Does it vary depending on where they're going? What's been your experience with the lay of the land and how people can receive these benefits and what they get?
Yeah, great question. I agree with Regina in that it does help to still tier the benefits when it comes to the overall package. But with cross cultural training and certain assessments, I think robust support is necessary. So, where customization helps is really looking into the person and not just the role that's being transitioned. So, when you look into the person, you'll have scenarios like Virginia mentioned where, oh, this transfer has had a background in the host country and maybe have had 10 years of experience already. So they could take the lighter package of cross-cultural training or just a refresher, where someone else who may have national ties but not hands-on, on-site ties to that host country may need robust, but on paper, you may make an assumption that just because they know the language or just because they may have family familiar ties to the host country that they are ready. So one of the benefits that I think is often overlooked for other employees that is often granted to your executives and your C-suite employees are those assessments, those pre-departure assessments that really allow them to be self-aware of personality, maybe their ability to react to change and respond to change and adapt. So there's some really great tools out there that can assess leaders that are transitioning, but I believe that is necessary at every level of the organization. So transferring that investment throughout each role that's going through the assignment so that they're not only receiving the training but becoming self-aware of where they are currently and how they respond to stress and change, how they can adapt, and that allows like fertile ground for the cultural training to take place. So part of it is not just learning the skills and tools, but the other part is being self-aware with how you communicate currently, how you may need to change your communication style. What are the norms there? What are the norms and values that you have already? So being prepared is way better than being reactive to any situation that you may encounter. And that's where I feel that, when you're looking at packages and saying what is effective and what is not, those really those leader assessments are something that everyone can benefit from, not just your executives.
Thank you, Elena. I think that's a really good point. Looking at being proactive and being prepared for the assignment. How can we do that? Understanding that each person is an individual and they're different, have different likes, aversions, styles, preferences, and that leadership assessment can be a really good way of figuring out who is this person, where is best to send them, what kind of assignment, how are they going to thrive, what's going to bring them down, what kind of changes do they need to make, and sort of instilling that sense of self-awareness. And Virginia, have you seen this with some of the employers or the employees? Is this a commonplace thing with providing these leadership assessments or some way for a relocating employee to give the employee an opportunity to sort of go through a self-awareness check?
I think it's really our responsibility as global mobility professionals to make the employees aware of this, and for us to also guide our clients that they will need the training, and then for them also to be aware of what it involves, because they don't know what they don't know. And I can bring myself as probably the best example, because probably you hear my accent. I'm not from the UK originally, so I studied English, so I've got a degree in English. And I was absolutely certain when I moved here that I do not need any of that, and I'm going to be absolutely fine. And I know the language, and I'm supposed to know the culture as well, and it's going to be okay. But it was not. And that's because you don't know what you don't know. So when I first met my now husband and we sat down for dinner, and I'm Hungarian, so we don't really say please and thank you with so many words, because for us it's superfluous. We kind of like infer it by context. So when I didn't say please and thank you, I was considered to be rude. So that's the kind of thing that we need to educate our clients on as well, that they don't know what they don't know. So we need to let them know that there's cultural training, why it is important, why we need to let them know that they need to take it, and how we can best kind of even sell it to them. It's almost like I feel like sometimes I'm a salesperson when I'm trying to get them to take up the opportunity of the cultural training, because it really is like that.
You make, Virginia, you make such a good point with your personal example there. Having moved from Hungary to the UK, it's something that didn't probably even cross your mind at first. You're like, I'll learn English, I'll just figure it out. Sit down for dinner, no please and thank you. Your future husband now he goes back to his friends maybe, and his friends say, well, how did the date go? And he's like, well, she didn't say please, like she didn't say thank
So
you.
rude.
I'm so rude. And you think to yourself, hold on, I was being polite. I just didn't need to. It was like waste of breath. Like, why would I say, or why I didn't need to say please and thank you in those situations, right? So little things like that, small words, nuances, that just brings to light, that hammers home the point right there. Small little things that people don't even think about or take for granted. um, that's some of the reason, why cultural training can be so important. Because if you think about it, think about that impact. If the two of you, hadn't been so open-minded and willing to communicate and understand and learn about one another's cultures, wow, could have had a very different turnout, right? Because of the initial impressions. So, Elaine, I'm curious, have you had any of those situations either in a, in any context, in your professional life, in a leisure trip, in a volunteer experience ever, where you realized that, okay, wow, you know what? There's something very different about this culture that I didn't realize.
Oh, absolutely. I remember a moment where I was eating a meal with some colleagues from Japan, and speaking of please and thank you, a way you show appreciation is, slurping your soup or just, making noise. And growing up in the southern part of the U.S., you don't make noise or slurp. You don't slurp your soup when you are eating. And at the point, I'm thinking I'm being very courteous while I'm eating, when my colleagues who were treating me to this delicious meal thought I didn't like it or appreciate it. So it's those nuances where we don't talk about what is normal and how we are gracious in certain circumstances until you go through experiencing it. And that's why, having that robust style of cultural training is really helpful. And not just, in the culture, or meeting with families and friends, but what are the cultural norms of the employer? Sometimes we can offend or come across a certain way with our emails or with some of our digital communications. And, there are norms, organizational norms, where you are expected to be very gracious and formal in the message. I hope this finds you well, Virginia, Robert, blah, blah, blah. And here's what I'm asking you, where other messages are more like, I guess, a telegram. Did you file the report today? And depending on the recipient's cultural norms, that could be very abrupt, very rude. You're ignoring their humanity. You didn't even ask about their day. You totally don't see them, and so that could feel very abrupt and off-putting. And being intentional about saying, this is how we communicate here. These are some of the styles of writing that you would see at this organization. Those are also topics that are often omitted when it comes to cultural training. And just because you're still with the same company, that's a different department, that's a different location. And so different locations can have different norms. Uh, Especially because different locations often have different functionality. This is the administrative office versus the manufacturing office, or this is the distribution center. And when you have individuals hop from building to building, there are nuances or subtleties to the culture that could be very different. So being delivered, or at least allow a safe space for the employee to ask questions like, why does this happen? Or I noticed that this is a different style of communication. Why do they do that? Is that expected of me? Or is it a personality difference? So really being open, but we can be here all day with moments when I've made mistakes of just simply not saying thank you, not saying thank you to the right person. Sometimes it's saying thank you to the elder first versus everyone else, or just certain ways that you acknowledge, gift giving, the list goes on and on with opportunities where you may not offend, but you erode your positive impact by not doing things within the norms of the culture.
Yeah. And then I think, just to inject into that, Elena, it's also very important for us mobility professionals to be culturally aware, based on what kind of clients we are servicing. And then you mentioned the Japanese culture. That just reminded me of a Japanese client I had a few years ago. And it was really, I was gobsmacked, because Japanese, they expect customer service at a level that is not really known to us Europeans. So, you know, for them, going above and beyond is the bare minimum. So, depending on what kind of clients we have to service, we really need to be aware of their culture as well. So it's not just for the employees, it's for us as well. We need to, it works both ways, really.
That's such a fascinating point, Frigine. I want to talk about that. Right, it's so important for everyone, right? Not just the relocating employee, but for employees in working for relocation management companies, employees working for destination companies, destination services, to know how to treat the employee, to understand their perspective of where they're coming from. As Frigina said, my experience in Japan, living there for 3 years, says the exact same thing. The level of customer service in Japan is so high, and therefore, in comparison to anything else I've seen in the world, and therefore what they expect is also generally very high. But Japanese people tend to be, not all, shy, and they won't. You need to know that. They're not going to tell you that. So it's a matter of like inferring this. It can be very tricky, which just hammers home with Frugina's point that the need for cultural training extends beyond just employees of like who are relocating. It's certainly important for them, but for anybody dealing with a person who is relocating in any capacity. And now I want to jump into a Japan experience I had, which was similar to, it's the same as Elena's with the slurping. I mean, I get there, and I'm out with some friends who I had met in Chiba, which is a province just outside of Tokyo. And we go for some ramen. And everybody in that place is like, I'm looking around like, what the is going on here? This is crazy. These people are rude. Can you not like make that noise? And then
I want to slurp, yeah,
and then I had to check myself because when I had this conversation with my friends, it's like, oh yeah, like let me show you how to do it. I'm like, well, why would I want to do that? Like, because it's polite. It shows you're enjoying. I said, well, really? Because where I'm from, that is so rude. You don't do that. But there you do that because it's polite, because by slurping, right? Like Elena, by making that noise, it shows that you're enjoying the meal. And to go one step further, I was also told by these friends that there's actually something that happens with the way that the air comes into your mouth when you do that. I see Frigina smiling. She probably knows this too.
I know what
it allows for a certain kind of way that they taste it. Like you can taste it differently or better.
Mhm.
And I had never even, ask almost any person who's never been to Japan. They tell you what are you talking about?
It's a functionality to it. So you learn something when you enter those opportunities. But yeah, it's the initial that knee-jerk reaction of like, oh my word. And I could just see my, grandmother like, how dare you slurp your soup, kind of thing. And it's just our upbringing. But again, there are funny moments too, when it comes to cross-cultural exchanges.
Absolutely. And as we talk about some of these fun and interesting and funny stories, I want to go back to a point that Elena made, which is really interesting and important, about like virtual communication, emails, phone calls, particularly emails, but just the fact that we're so virtual nowadays. That's so true, right? Who's ever received an email that seems really short and abrupt, and you're thinking, oh, that's rude. This person can't even say, hi, how's your day? But how about the same person who's received an email, or a different person, and they have said, wow, this is so lengthy. I don't need all this extra fluff. Well, I just want to know what's the point here, right? And so it really brings to light the thought of how do we train people on, how to look at communication, like where it's coming from, and and thank you, Andrew, for that point. And as Andrew's saying too, just understanding, right, the local and the global cultural identity, and also to bring back to Elena's point about what kind of, which part of the company is it coming from? Is it coming from the accounting department? Is it coming from the marketing department? Because you might have different communication styles based on the, let's say, the silo or the
discipline. Mhm.
exactly, the discipline of that company combined with the culture to understand, is someone going to interpret that as like extra fluff? Is someone going to interpret that as direct and to the point? How does that make somebody feel? And understanding these differences is quite important now. And as we have seen with the rise of global communication virtually, right, with Zoom calls and emails, because so much travel has been restricted because of the pandemic. Curious both your takes, Elena, Frigina. Do you ladies think, and Richard, if we need to jump in for anything, just let us know. Do you believe that now, with more communication being so virtual, has that impacted the need for cultural training?
I think more than ever. So, because a lot of colleagues, when they are getting hired, especially, they don't even meet each other. So, communication is getting more and more challenging. So, you have to infer in context a lot more. Some people, they meet only online. Some people only see each other on camera in the initial months, because some people are not able to travel at all just yet. So, in that time, you don't really know a person, and also we assume a lot about each other, and some people have better days, some people have worse days, and it's easy to assume a person is rude, because sometimes I get emails where it starts as Frigina and not hi Frigina or dear Frigina, and then I'm just like, why are you so rude to me? So I think now in the online world it's even more important than it used to be.
I agree. I think there's so much that has shifted, and usually the virtual environment was the preface before we meet in person, but now we have entire working relationships that may not have the opportunity to meet in person. So we have to look at our culture training for all virtual relationships. So how do you build trust? How you really learn about someone when you can't really meet with them in person, or you may never find that opportunity for the length of the project or assignment. And that's an opportunity for the trainers in this space to really look at styles of delivery, as well as just certain topics that are relevant to this moment that have not been relevant before. So how do you honor someone, for hierarchical groups that value the elders, or those who are from polychronic cultures where you can arrive a little late. That's different when you have a Zoom or a virtual meeting that's at a set time. Do you allow people to pop in and out? Do you shift the platform a bit where it's not very disruptive when people pop in and out of a digital meeting? So now we're looking at cultural training and the need for it in a different way. But like Regina mentioned, we need it now more than ever, but more topics are being introduced to this space, and it's a little bit more broader now. So it's like everyone needs it, not just someone who's transitioning, but the entire team, both in the host country as well as the home country.
Fabulous. Thanks, Lena, Frigina, and Robert for all of those discussions. You've been doing just fantastically, as I've been trying to work backstage to get us online with LinkedIn. And what I'm really hoping is that there's a culture somewhere out there that accepts technical problems as being quite okay, if not positive. So Yeah, but what I'd like to do now, please, is I'll run the sponsors video. It'll give you a chance to have a 2-minute well earned break, and I'll run the video, and then I think possibly we'll dip into there was, I think, a comment and a question perhaps from the audience there. And so we'll do that, and then I'll hand back to yourselves, if I may, for further discussion. So here we go with the video, and I'd like to obviously officially and humbly apologize to viewers on LinkedIn who have been queuing there and waiting to get on. I did try to communicate that we are live on YouTube as well, but sincere apologies if you've been a little bit frustrated trying to get on and maybe didn't until you've seen this recording. I'd also like to very much thank the sponsors of Blue Room and Saba Networking, and I would like to also highlight something new that we've launched, Co-Time cafe and bar. It's something which we're mimicking really what we've done for about 11-12 years as a live event in London, which is a monthly networking event for the service department sector. So please do. It's cotime.com, co-time.com. It's open 24/7, and please do use it as a resource to meet and to network. I'm going to try and get critical mass in there. It'll be great fun. And please, after this broadcast, do join us, and I'll put a banner up with repeating that URL. But thank you very much to the sponsors, and here's the advert. It always sort of like comes rather abruptly back into the room, and it takes you by surprise, doesn't it? So let's dip into the points and questions. So Andrew said, "Great point, Robert. All too often, RMCs overlook the importance and understanding of a corporate client's local, global, cultural identity during contract implementation. It's equally important to understand corporate administrative culture as much as individual assignees' personal culture." Yeah. So so that's saying then that the culture of the company, is that right, is as important as the culture. Yeah, interesting.
Totally agree. Thank you,
Yeah,
Andrew.
that was the point that you made, actually, wasn't it, Elena? And you were all, I think, it were in previous to. Would you like to expand on that at this stage before we go on to another point?
Absolutely. So, what Andrew brings up as a great point is not just the employer being intentional about communicating their culture, but making sure that all of their suppliers and vendors are aware of it. In fact, suppliers should be proactive in asking about it and prompting it so that there is just better cohesion with providing services. So, this is something where you want to be an extension of your client and provide the same, if they're very white glove, high touch, then making sure that you transfer that same level of customer service to your clients' employees, because that could really negatively impact the employee's experience if that's not done or just seem very abrupt, because the employee will see, oh wow, that relocation manager just was very rude, and then they'll go back to HR, the global mobility specialist, to complain, and not necessarily to the vendor. So this is something, when it comes to new relationships and partnerships, to really establish, how do you want us to represent you and how do you want us to function? And that could make an impact with whether or not the partnership will work out, because you may not have the capacity to offer the same level of support that is expected by that client. So this is, when it comes to onboarding and new partnerships, this is a critical question to ask.
Fabulous. Thanks, Elena. Would anybody like to add to that, or are we okay there? Looks like we're okay. Some people are trickling in through LinkedIn again. So Janet, great to see you. Good to see my friends. I was waiting. Yeah.
Hi, Janet.
I think that a lot of people sadly are waiting there. So sorry. Veronica has a question. How does one deal with situations where people have had cultural training about how to behave when they arrive in the USA, UK, Canada, for example, may have been given incorrect information about stereotypes in each of these Western countries? Would anybody like to start with that one, please?
Sure, Veronica, I'll jump in on this one. I think the best thing we can do is, we use the cultural training to the best of our ability, but, inevitably, people are going to have their own experiences. And sometimes, as you point out, which is totally accurate, they might find that what they're experiencing is different than what they may have been told. And that's okay too, because I think the benefit of the cultural training is to understand sort of a baseline of what, how a culture tends to act. And then you have the opportunity as the employee or whoever is interacting with the new culture to swim in it, feel around, and make your own perceptions and judgments. And so I think that the ability to pick out and identify, you know what, I don't really think that this was exactly the way it was told. I think that is part of the higher human reasoning that we have to sort of pick apart those things. And so I think in those situations, it can be beneficial, because you can look at it and say, okay, maybe this is how some people perceive it to be, but that's not the way I perceive it to be.
And I just want to concentrate on the word incorrect information. I maybe want to expand on that a little bit and understand what they mean by incorrect information. So Veronica, if you can just tell us a little bit more about that, if you've got like a specific example, because I just feel like there's not really any such thing as incorrect information about a culture, because every person tends to be a little bit different. We all tend to behave a little bit different. So it may be that person experienced a different side of the same culture. So it's not necessarily incorrect information. What I would do in that situation, I would just try and manage expectations, and then see how they can relate to that aspect of the culture in a certain way and how that is managed best.
Yeah. Go ahead, Elena.
Oh, I really appreciate Veronica's question. I do kind of understand what she meant by incorrect. I think it's just I would say overgeneralized information, where it doesn't connect with just the nuances that could happen, or just the fact that human beings are multifaceted, and we have layers, right? So you may make generalizations because, we come from certain backgrounds or even professional training and experiences. So you may make assumptions. If I had a career in accounting, that you may assume that I make certain assumptions or communication style. When you meet me, you're kind of surprised, like, oh, you're kind of creative for an accountant, or, that, you can really trip and stumble on those things. And when it comes to country cultures, sometimes the geographic nuances are ignored. Like if you are in different regions or on the coast or in the city or in the rural area, if you have a certain religious or faith background, that could have nuances. And so I would say it should all have a disclaimer that this is a generalization, that see people for who they are and get to learn who they are, build a relationship, and know that their experience is their experience. Because you can do all the training you want to, but it does not substitute from establishing the relationship and really getting to know people for who they are.
I agree with that. Just to build on that point, Elena, and I think a lot of times we understand that the cultural training is sort of a general lay of the land. This is what you can overall expect. But everyone's also, what I want to add is everyone's unique perspective based on their experience is going to impact their view. Because let's say people tend to say Americans are pretty direct. Okay. That's also going to, like Elena, you said, that's going to depend on the region. I mean, some people might say in the East, like New Yorkers are very direct, right? But what about a New Yorker who's been like all over the world, like me, who's been like who isn't just born and raised in New York? What about Midwest or South? Well, they tend to be a little less direct. And then let's look at it from other other countries' perspectives. A Japanese person might say, yes, Americans are very direct, right? Because in comparison to an extremely indirect culture, Americans are perceived as very direct. But let's say an Israeli person, for example, might look at Americans and say, these guys aren't direct, right? Because from a very direct culture. So it kind of sort of depends on people's experiences, where they're coming from. Yeah, that's my take.
Thank you. Thank you. So Veronica's added there incorrect information as it may have been given, as this is how people in each country behave. However, the nuances may not have been made clear. So, yeah.
I would just say maybe it's time to engage with the cultural service provider who perhaps gave that information. I'm just a bit surprised that, because that's not my experience, and I've not really seen that kind of information being given out to people that I have worked with and cultural training companies that I have worked with. It almost does come with a disclaimer. So this is the typical behavior that you can expect, but you cannot carve this into stone. So I think we all need to make sure as well that we do like relate to the transferees that this is something that they cannot interpret as this is applicable to every single person that they're ever going to meet.
And you know, Regina, that's the downside of having the quickie, really microwave style of cultural training, because it could have I know some service providers provide the 1 hour training versus the 6 week or extended approach, and you can't cover everything in an hour. In fact, you have to resort to generalizations, and that's where those generalizations are made, and you just can't cover everything. So you have to pick and choose, and that's where it could be really risky for someone, especially if it's matched with someone who does not have a background in the culture. It's different if they do have some history and background, that all they need is a refresher. But for employers, you know, and really looking at what they're deciding to do. So it goes back to budgeting, really, and looking at sometimes decisions are made by just the flat cost. Oh, this is expensive, so we can only do the really quick and cultural training, but that's not the best for the employee and preparing that employee. So that's why we have to look beyond the general ledger and look at what is the best duty of care for that employee.
It's almost like fast fashion, isn't it? So you buy the clothes,
yes.
You wash it once and it's just going to be useless. So it's interesting point about the 1 hour cultural training. It's almost
there's some that are out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost detrimental rather than useful, because then some people might interpret some things that they hear in that 1 hour in the wrong way.
I agree with both of what you're saying, and I think that sometimes organizations may look at it like the quick fix. This is the cheapest thing, but it doesn't really tend to benefit the employee as much as a longer term, extended cultural training. I've always been a fan of an extended training that's provided in sessions, right, throughout time, that allows employees to really maybe have a baseline understanding before they go or right when they get there, and then check-in sessions to understand more about the culture and compare it to their own experiences, as they've had a chance to sort of swim around and have their own experiences in that culture, right? Let it seep in, have some training, have some experiences, compare it, and as you move forward, I think that is one of the most effective ways to really provide the cross-cultural training.
Fabulous. Thank you, everybody. What I was wondering about, and forgive me because I've been a tiny bit distracted with this technical issue, but was, and forgive me if it's been discussed already. So we're talking about cultural differences geographically, and I guess that then also there is an issue, and you're talking about emails and how you sign them off and start, and I totally over communicate and dear such and such, best regards, and have a and I see my children coming back and they're kind of like just really abrupt. My communication has been consigned to the dad communication sort of bucket now. But what I'm wondering is then, bearing that in mind, so you've got the cultural differences and you've got the generational differences. Are there any cultures in the world? I know it's a bit of a difficult one to maybe put you on the spot with here, but are there particular cultures where the generational changes have been so significant that you're saying, okay, that country 10 years ago, that would have been the advice, but that country now, totally different? Are there any particularly, prominent sort of changes? I mean, I might take as an example, and I mean, well, I don't know if it's kind of a particularly good example, but let's take Germany. And a degree of Americanization post-war, and a culture there which where the generation, let's say my mother-in-law's generation, would have a totally different outlook to my wife's generation. So and maybe therefore recommendations if you were to be going to those countries. Is there anything there? Obviously, I suppose the communist world, something to be, the Eastern Bloc, isn't it?
Wouldn't you say that's all of them? So all of the countries, just because with the technology becoming what it is today, with the internet becoming what it is today, we shortened the language. It evolved into something completely different. And even now, if I listen to teenagers speak, and I'm not a teenager anymore, I sometimes don't understand the words that they are saying, and it is in English, but the slang, what it evolved into, is sometimes it's just really, really hard to understand.
Absolutely. I'm still a teenager, but sorry, Elaine, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to give an example of working with international students at colleges and universities. When I first started out doing immigration work 20 years ago, it was I had to understand like nuances of the different countries and nationalities and cultures. With technology, just the whole process of communicating about compliance to if the student has a challenge or another, it's on text, it's on WhatsApp or WeChat, and it's an adjustment for me. Now I feel it makes me feel old, having to be comfortable on these digital platforms talking about, insurance claim issues or even just funding and, just deeper topics that this would be a face-to-face conversation in the office, but there's more comfort in talking about it on a technical platform across nationalities. So it's not just the student from Colombia versus the student from India. They all have this preference. And so that's where I would say there's a generational connection where they're very trusting of tech. Now I'm very suspect of privacy and other things, but if I want to communicate with them, I can't send an email. I can, but they're not going to read the email as quickly as they would a WeChat message or something on WhatsApp, or even reaching out on Facebook. And so I had to shift in how my go-to communication platform based on this generation. So 20 years ago and the current generation is very different in how they receive and process information. So that's one shift that I've definitely experienced in my work.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Frigina.
Sorry, I just really wanted to say I'm a millennial, so it's obviously everybody knows that we are afraid of the phone. So we literally do anything and everything but the phone. So you can email us, you can text us, just never call us, please.
Yeah, we've also seen that shift, I think, in the States. Like when I was in high school, like it was like, oh, there's a text. Oh, okay, we was just starting to text, and then people transitioned to only texting, and no one really calls anymore. And so, understanding the generational, as everyone's been talking about, how technology is used across generations, what generation within a culture are we dealing with, and also what has that generation experienced historically, politically? What have they gone through that may have impacted them on an even deeper level? That may have impacted, let's say, Generation X differently than Generation Y, differently than Generation Z. So I think it's a great question, Richard, and I'm wondering if we have time to discuss. I was just thinking something might be interesting to talk about is the effect of cultural training on the family of the employee, like spouses and children. I'm wondering if we have time to discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, it's certainly depending. I'll just run through some of the points. Thank you for
Sure.
asking, Robert. I'll just run through some of the points that Milton is making here, and then we'll go into that. So Milton from Executive Suites by Roseman in Winnipeg, Canada, made some points here. This is a hiring issue. We have to hire people who are interested in putting themselves in others' shoes. And so you start with the right person, then you train them.
I'd agree with that. I mean, there's has to be, employees have to have a level of empathy, I think, to be effective. And the most effective employees, in my opinion, are the trainable ones, the people who can grasp new information, new ways of doing things, and are sponges, are really open to new perspectives. And those are some of the most the people who are some of the most receptive to cultural training because they're open to those new perspectives.
Right. Yeah. And then, so before I return to you, Robert. So Andrew's just taking his leave here. He's stepping out for a client luncheon. But your topical points are spot on, and more corporations need to buy into the importance of cultural training. Given the technical challenges early in the podcast, I recommend that Richard revisit this meeting topic with the same expert panel. Have a great rest of the day. So he will have gone, but thank you for that comment, Robert. Andrew, if you do watch the recording, and there's an open invitation to all of you to please do. Let's do that. I think we might have the 16th of December available, if you are available, because this we're just not, there's so much to discuss really. There's been some new comments here, I think. So that's Milton. We hire for empathy and service. So there you go. Thanks, Milton, for your input there. And then back to you, Robert, for the point, for the next point, and then anything that we haven't been able to discuss, then maybe we can have a part 2 of this one. But
yeah, and it's up to you if you want to save that for another discussion or if you want to touch upon it now. It's either way is okay.
Please do go. I think we should go for it, and then we can. Sure. And then maybe when we start off the next one, then maybe we start with that point.
Sure, we could kind of revisit it, and I think just to start us off on that topic and sort of close us out for today's session, just the thought of, I think a lot of times organizations look at, they look at it like a business transaction. As they should from one perspective. They're a business. That corporation is an entity. It's a business. So how is this going to impact the business? What are the costs and all this? But I think it's really important to also look at it from a human perspective. And that means we are moving somebody's entire life, which means we are also potentially moving other people's lives. And other people may not be able to work as easily or at all. And other people may be very young and not sure how to transition. So when we move a person, we have to think of it from the perspective that we're moving a person. So I think it's really important that organizations focus on the spousal training too, right? Because just as employees can move to a new place and be culturally disoriented, so can and will the trailing spouse, the kids, all that. And if they're out of their element, they have no community, they have no friends, kind of just sitting around. If they're introverted, even harder, right? Because how do they make friends? How do they go out? How do they have a community? What do they do? So I'm interested to, as you kind of heard my perspective on, I'm interested to hear from our other panelists, Elena and Regina. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's important that employers also focus on spousal training?
Yes, so my perspective, absolutely. And I can't remember the exact percentage. I recently read that I think it was something as high as 80 something percent of the assignments that fail is due to the spouse not enjoying the new location. So it is really, really important that we get the whole family's experience right. And companies shouldn't only concentrate on the actual assignee or transferee fitting into the new company culture. It's just as important for the family to feel right in the new location. And as you just said, it's also because they relocate, they literally pack up their whole life, come to a new country. They have no friends. They are in a new culture. They're just as clueless as ever, and they don't even know where to buy shampoo. And I cannot imagine just how bad that must be. So, if not just as important, I think it is even more important because the spouse will go into work, the spouse will have some form of an interaction with other people. So they will be a bit more culturally aware either way because they're going to pick it up from work. But more often than not, what I have seen is that a lot of spouses will only start working later on, if ever. If their visa even allows for them to work. So for them to be able to establish some form of an awareness, for them to then be able to go on to establish a community for themselves and amalgamate into their new surroundings, it is super, super important for them to be included in this as well.
I agree. I've learned this when transitioning individuals into the U.S. How often, and again, it's a culture thing. There's a focus on the employee and not about the employee support system, and so this is fortifying the employee support system by just offering something. So not just cultural training, but we know in our industry that, it could be job support. It could also be just the way the school or just various destination services and settling in support that's offered. But the cultural training is also key because the spouse could be a different culture, from a different culture, also a professional, and it would support that spouse's ability to transition well into a job and being productive, or just getting around the city or the location in which they live. Because even if the employment situation is wonderful, they're having a great time on the job, they have to go home eventually, they have to go to bed. So that negative impact could really recreate and just downplay the experience overall. So when you look at employees as just full, well-rounded human beings on an experience, then you really have to look at it from all sides. And that is really hard to measure and create budget line items for. But there are, suppliers. Our industry has gotten so much better in providing services for that. We just have to be very aware and ask the question in order to be relevant and just, again, customize the experience for each employee.
Yeah, I agree. Elena, just to sort of close out this topic, to bank on what you and Regina were saying, it's just take home point here, I think, is
Mhm.
so important to look at it from all angles. Look at it from the company's perspective, but look at it from the employee's perspective. Remember that the employee is a human being, and outside of work, just think about yourself. Anyone who's watching this broadcast, you also have a life outside of work, right? I hope. And you do other things outside of work that affect your work, right? So if you, personal true example, spoke to an employee once who, would come home from work and spouse was on the floor crying, just completely distressed because of these things that she didn't have that support, moved to a new spot, didn't know what she was doing, couldn't work. So if your partner and or your children are extremely upset, distressed, devastated, do you think you're going to be in a good mood? Do you think you're going to be productive at work? No, right? Because it all circles in and it affects one another. So that's something to keep in mind, I think, when employers look at the relocation and providing cultural training, providing spousal support, is that it really does affect employees on a level outside of the spectrum of work, which in turn affects their work and then affects productivity, profitability, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. I'd like to thank you all so much, because you've done it's been such an interesting discussion, and I'm sorry that I was a little bit distracted during the broadcast, but it would be fantastic if you could find time to come back, and we'll do a part 2 of this, because I would love to get more involved than I've been able to on this occasion. But thank you, Frigina, Elena, Robert. I really appreciate it. Anybody, any of you or anyone in the audience who has time to join us at co-time.com, please do so. It's a great platform. It's really good fun. It puts another kind of dimension, adds another dimension to networking online. So please dip in, have a go. I'm going to go there after the broadcast anyway, so at least I'll be there. And thank you again. Fantastic panel and audience, live and recorded. Maybe I will, if I may, turn to yourselves just for a final couple of words, each of you, to repeat your company name and what have you, and any final thoughts on the topic, perhaps. Robert, would you like to perhaps kick off?
Sure. Rob Mazel from Rob Mazel Consulting here, cross-cultural trainer and travel coach. And just want to thank everybody here on the panel today, Elena, Frigina, Richard, for a wonderful discussion, and all our audience for chiming in and listening, for all those who watched live, for all those who will watch the recording. Pleasure to be here, and honored to be included in this discussion today.
Thanks, Robert. And Elena, would you like to?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about this topic. We can go on all day. I'm Elena from Addy Solutions, so I'm available if anyone would like, a thought partner regarding this topic for their own organization. And I really appreciate being part of this dynamic panel with Regina and Robert. And thank you so much, Richard, for just creating this platform. But my departing thought is to always remember the employee's experience and see where it can be improved and what are some of the blind spots in navigating their journey on assignment. Thank you.
Elena. Thank you. And Regina, last but not least, Regina.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much, Robert and Elena, and thank you, Richard, for organising. I'm really honoured to have been asked to take part, and it was a really spirited discussion, so thank you. And I really enjoyed the discussion. It was really great points made as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Once more to everyone. I'll play the outro video, and at that point, it's best to perhaps leave the stage, and perhaps see you at co-time.com. Thanks very much. Bye.